My name's Frank McCormick. I'm the editor of the Waterways Journal here with Ken Erickson. Before we get started, I just want to say thank you to the Waterways Journal, which is sponsoring this segment. One thing I didn't want to talk about was of course, I'm based in New Orleans. I've seen you a lot more in person down here. And so I did want to give you a chance to talk about some of the projects that you've been working on with some ports and waterways along the Gulf Coast that run.
Yeah, Frank, it's been fun to see you when I'm down there. I always enjoy New Orleans. Polaris has been engaged by the 5 deepwater ports from Baton Rouge, Port of South Louisiana, Port of New Orleans, St. Bernard Port, Harbor and Terminal District, and the newly named Louisiana Gateway Port. They've come together through the Louisiana Ports and Waterways Investment Commission, which Governor Landry stood up in August of 2024. And one of the assignments was we need to bring together an understanding what's moving on the system down there. That was phase one. What I'm leading is phase two. We need a marketing study with them. We need to find a strategic marketing study that brings these 5 ports together, because if you look at that waterway of 232.5 miles, that is the largest volume of commodities moving on any waterway system in the United States of America, on par with some of the largest port waterway systems in the world, whether it's Shanghai, Rotterdam. You've got a large volume moving about 600 million tons of cargo on that waterway stretch. It's more than double any other waterway in the United States. They do operate independently, and the mandate's not about trying to bring them together under one port authority, but really to bring together their marketing capabilities. How do you market this 232.5 miles that they've got all these capabilities? They have these great amount of resources flowing in and out from the Mississippi River Ship Channel area. And so that's a real exciting opportunity to bring, really the mandate's this. It's about unity and not uniformity. Each of the 5 port areas, and it's not just the public ports. We're working with the public ports, but it's also, there's several private ports, there's private terminals. There's a lot that fit in within that. And a rising tide lifts all boats, is the old saying. And, we believe we're going to put together, and working with 4 other contractors, put together a strategic marketing plan to take to the world that does a couple of things here. One, how do we raise the volume of traffic and cargo on the Mississippi River Ship Channel? 2, how do we get more direct investment, whether from foreign direct investment or domestic, and not just at the river port itself, but maybe inland. Maybe it's about a value-added operation, a new warehousing opportunity, or a transload capability. And then lastly, what are the investment requirements for capital improvement at these 5 ports? What's the prioritization? If you look at the competing ports along the Gulf, on the East Coast and West Coast, they've organized themselves to put in huge amounts of money. And quite frankly, some of these ports, is at one of their terminals, they're putting as much money in that one terminal every year that these 5 ports try to do over 5 years. Through the state of Louisiana, has got to take this budget of money and spread it over not just 5 ports, but maybe it's 32, maybe it's 41, however many ports are in Louisiana, inland, shallow draft, and other coastal deepwater ports, including Lake Charles and others. They're all sharing this pot that is small relative to other port areas. So the question is, what's the investment need? And then how is this a model to use for the state of Louisiana, and to really work within the framework of the Louisiana Economic Development strategy that was launched in March this year, and to bring unity within Louisiana to build up economic opportunities. We've met with the 5 ports themselves, with about 33 stakeholders, and now we're coming into the point of now synthesizing it to bring the ports together, the executive leadership, and ask the question, right, how does this fit in? What do you see? How do we make this work for these 5 ports? So that's one study. The other one is working with a Big River Coalition. We've done a pre-look at the report, and the final report's all but released, looking at the economic impacts of different conditions on the Mississippi River Ship Channel, what that means to navigation, jobs, economic activity, and such on that stretch of the river. So, and also lastly, looking at what is it to have containers on the river system moving by different opportunities, whether it's by self-propelled vessel or container on barge. Is that a feasible option that would serve the entire stretch of the system? I believe, Frank, going back to that marketing strategy, if the ports really adopt and implement the roadmap that we're going to present, we believe that that's going to be self-serving to the entire Mississippi River system that touches 33 states, 2 provinces, and really that interaction of shallow draft and deep draft there from Baton Rouge down is so important to the economy.
And that was one of the things that I'd hoped that you'd bring up, the work that's done, not in the South, in the Louisiana ports, but along the Gulf Coast. That really does have an effect upstream on farmers and really just system wide.
Because if you look at some of those, what kind of marketing are people doing down in the Mississippi River Ship Channel? The ports are trying to be that economic development conduit to allow activity to happen, allow trade to happen, allow commodities to flow. Then you've got those tenants. Maybe it's a terminal operator. Maybe it's a barge operator. Well, they're clients and they're marketing and selling to people all over the upper Mississippi River system, Ohio River, Tennessee River, Missouri River, Arkansas River. You're just looking at how do you connect those points of Pittsburgh to Knoxville to Chicago to Minneapolis, St. Paul to Kansas City and Little Rock, Tulsa, to be able to serve to the Gulf and the Gulf to serve them. And there is a symbiotic relationship there that will be important as they go forward, because multiple players are doing multiple things, and trying to get this, getting it right is going to be important, not just for the 5 ports, but for the.
Is there any timeline in place as far as the marketing strategy and your study with Big River, or is that to be determined?
The Big River's all but released. It's just waiting for a couple of things here on that. There's been a lot of moving parts in the state of Louisiana. Even on the marketing study, we're looking at early December to have recommendations to the special committee. The special committee is engaged regularly with us. They'll take it to their Louisiana Ports Waterways Investment Commission, we believe. We're not sure of the sequence, but at that point, they'll be looking at it and they have to make a decision of what that roadmap looks like. And will they adopt it, and will they invest in that roadmap to go to the world and unify themselves in that regard? Stay tuned, and we'll see how this comes alive.
So, as you may know, the Port of Mobile, Alabama Port Authority had a ribbon cutting last week to mark the Mobile Harbor reaching 50 feet. And one of the things that I noticed in that event was Port of Mobile referred to, I guess, alternatively as the Port of Alabama. They were talking about how Alabama really has one deep water port and it represents a single entity that does port coordination and logistics statewide. I think that presents an interesting question. We've talked about an arms race of sorts with port development along the Gulf Coast, and I really think East Coast as well. And I think a lot of that has been spurred by the Panama Canal expansion, but I feel like it begs the question of where are we in terms of nationwide as far as waterway expansion and terminal projects? Is there always going to be a room for growth and competition? And how is that, how do we achieve some sort of coordination among all of those competing ports and terminals?
That's the gazillion-dollar question, Frank. And is there a magic wand? Is there a secret? No. But it's also, there's room for expansion, and a lot of the ports have done the expansion. We referenced the Panama Canal, and certainly that was a great seed or fertilizer to lead to a lot of this investment. Because at the Panama Canal, they built a new set of locks to accommodate a 50-foot draft, and the Mississippi River Ship Channel has been dredged to 50 feet along the Gulf Coast, all but about 130 some miles getting towards Baton Rouge. And that, maybe not every ship's going to need 50 feet of water, But that 50 feet of water does bring reliability to the system here, even during periods of low water. When infrastructure is implemented, things happen. We have seen this over history, whether it's in the Puget Sound on the Columbia Snake River, when they dredged to 47 feet, immediately we saw vessels being loaded heavier to a deeper draft, and you just get better economics with that. We saw it over in Wilmington. They put in a large turning basin, and immediately we saw larger vessels serving that port because now they could turn them easier. You've also seen it on the Mississippi River Ship Channel, where a Cape-sized vessel, one of the largest, loaded just a year ago, I think it was, of coal, and take on very large volumes, a record size, and they took advantage of the draft availability there. That infrastructure is important, and Mobile's done that. And now Mobile, a state agency, they only have, not many ports to have to contend with, unlike Louisiana with 32 or 41, depending who you talk to. And then you go to Texas, they have a number of ports. They don't have the inland component. Louisiana has both deep draft and shallow draft and coastal. You go to the East Coast, where Georgia Port Authority has 2 or 3 ports, and so they're able to focus and concentrate a lot better. How do you try to unify around that to say, what is most strategic? What is the ask when we go to the state and say, look, here's going to be the highest needs payoff? And how do you do it in a coordinated way? That's important. I think that's what Louisiana is attempting to do, because it's not just the state money. It's also going to the federal government, whether it's through the Maritime Administration or Congress. How do you do that in a way that's quantifiable, that has meaning? Because at the end of the day, a lot of places get a lot of money. Was that the best money spent? That's a challenge, because when people apply for it, agencies have an obligation to review those. Is that the most efficient? It may be more incumbent upon the states to say, how do we actually manage that in some way? I'm trying to not say the word control, but manage that process to say what's the highest and best use for us as a state. At the same time, Frank, if you've got confusion about who do you talk to in a port, or who do you talk to in a state about investing, if there's too many players, too much red tape, or too many layers, go find the place with the fewer layers or the fewer levels of bureaucracy. And so there's a lot to that question there beyond just dollars and cents. It's also about people who want to make an investment. They got money, but it may be too confusing to go in there, and they won't do it.
I don't know if you saw from the Port of Mobile announcement about getting the 50 feet in that harbor. They highlighted it's the deepest access channel to a container terminal on the Gulf, but the first ship that took advantage of that 50-foot draft was a coal bulk carrier at the coal terminal. Because they certified 50 feet, it was able to load to its deepest capacity, which was 48 feet. It's just interesting. You said that when infrastructure is implemented, things happen. And that's a good example of a ship that was able to immediately take advantage of that increased draft.
Why wouldn't you? If you could, and the seller and the buyers can come to terms and accept that, you actually get lower cost even on the full transit of that. You just lower the ocean freight cost all the more, and you get more volume. And if the destination can accept the vessel that size and that volume of cargo, bingo, let's make it happen. It's a perfect example.
One last question I had for you was AI has been in the news a lot lately. We had a story this week about the Coast Guard looking at a certain application of AI to improve communications, particularly emergency operations and communications. Where do you see AI playing a role in logistics, analytics, harbor expansion, terminal construction, farming, all these things that we've been talking about for the last half hour? Is that already happening, or where do you see maybe that growing into as far as informing those types of actions and investments?
If it's not already happening, then people are late. You needed to be on it yesterday. Tomorrow, there's going to be greater enhancements AI is a great tool and resource. It's got to come with a lot of caveats. You got to trust but verify. And every time you're using that, you've got to trust but verify. But as you start bringing it into your system, using your own data models, it's not for the faint of heart. At the end of the day, there's certain things that will help you do with communications, with writing things, or to search on certain things that you can go verify much easier and faster. Then you can start pulling together vast amounts of data and help to see a picture that maybe you couldn't see before. AI has a great amount of opportunity and promise there to really reduce the amount of time that you're trying to do certain things, routine tasks or tasks that you'd have to do multiple searches on, let's just say at the very rudimentary level. For communication with the Coast Guard, certainly that would be most important. But I got to tell you, Frank, having just recently part of that deepwater port marketing strategy of putting together, one of the stakeholders I met with was the New Orleans district of the Coast Guard, New Orleans sector of the Coast Guard. Sector New Orleans, thank you. They're over there on Algiers Point. Well, I got to tell you, impressive. If anyone hasn't been there or understand what they do look it up. To be able to go and meet with the commander on duty and get a rundown of how they try to communicate with one another. To turn around behind them is this room of people monitoring conditions, monitoring what's moving in on the marine transport traffic. And they've got retired Coast Guard people or people who have been on vessels. Behind them, they've got pilots who rotate through there, river pilots that bring ships in and out. They rotate in there to be available to address things or to know who to communicate with. Talk about instantaneous. There is still something about having a live radio that you hit a button and talk to somebody and have people in a room to go through, and to get that read on body language, to get that read on having been standing on the bridge of a vessel and know what goes on. There's no better communication than to watch that happen there. How AI can interpret that and other things, kind of interesting to watch. I think that they're probably going to move fast, but measured, and work closely with the industry to put it together. Look at the IMX this last year. There was a panel talking about vessel buildings and new builds and investment in equipment. One of the questions was about AI, and Brian Mueller with Heartland Marine and Heartland Industries, he talked about he uses it to monitor and track certain legislation or market things. He's using that as a tool. Now, that's a good entry point, but there's more that can be done with that. And every day there's a new improvement to somebody's AI model out there. They're going to continue to improve, but at the end of the day, it's trust but verify. You need to know garbage in, garbage out. And you also need to know that as you got your vast amount of data, how do you get into a system? How do you keep it protected? What type of data science team really do you have, or analyst team, if you understand what's going on? It's not a matter of just dumping and getting a full answer. It's easy enough to get some pictures drawn up or images. But when you're making decisions around life and death events, economic events, capital improvements, or capital investment, that's another layer of trust that you've really got to verify.
That you haven't just been in South Louisiana. I was curious to see in some of your travels around the world, what has been a favorite destination?
One of the places I've enjoyed going to is Southeast Asia. It's a large population base full of various cultures, culinary tastes, and different types of spices, and really traditional, cultural, religious aspects to what they eat and how they eat. End of the day, everyone's got to eat. And that's what makes what we get to do every day with transportation and commodities so exciting, because of the deep roots that agriculture has. But really it's because of transportation. A trader's not trading corn. They're not trading coal. They're trading freight. So to go to Southeast Asia and watch what is transpiring and look, the United States needs other markets to go to. We had relied so heavily on China to be able to go to other markets and really look at what's there. We're talking hundreds of millions of people outside of China, another 1.5 billion, 2 billion people. And then if you start adding India into the mix, another layer, the largest populous country in the world, as you just take a portion of those populations and you see that a portion improve economically. Maybe it's 500 million people, maybe it's 300 million people. You don't need the entire population. You need stair steps. And as people start getting better wages, better earning potential, they move up that food chain, so to speak, in what they purchase. And then they start looking for enjoyment in the way they eat. And what we see is that their caloric intake goes up. When you start improving their caloric intake, they need other foods, other ingredients, different proteins. You need the ingredients to feed those critters. You need the energy to support the lifestyle, to have cold chains or the electricity, in addition to what AI and data centers require. Frank, I look at Southeast Asia, rapid growth in so many places. Vietnam is a really special place, and what they've gone through and transpired, it's phenomenal to see the melting pot of different cultures there. It is remarkable. It's really fascinating. I like spicy food and get my mix in Southeast Asia, but just the culture, the history. They're used to dynasties coming and going, but they're resilient and they get to be very much resourceful in what they do. And they're looking to live another day, live better tomorrow than they did today, have their kids be better than them, and to see people move up that value chain and to take care of all people. So Southeast Asia is just really, really
And
fascinating.
speaking of Southeast Asia and resilience, I believe it was at IMX that you arrived to give a presentation, and you had just gotten back from Southeast Asia and you were firing all cylinders, and that was really impressive.
Actually, it was 2 hours before I just got back on the ground and went into IMX.
Didn't mean to sell you short.
With my new jacket, by the way. I got a jacket made in Vietnam, so I was able to support it
Nice.
for the at IMX.
Anything else you'd add? Appreciate the time and always enjoy the conversation with you.
Well, thanks, Frank. It's a privilege of mine. It's always been a pleasure working with the Waterways Journal and the team, and you, Frank. It is now been over a year you've been the editor. So that's exciting. And I guess for you, being the editor, what's that been like for you to transition?
It's definitely the first little bit was like peering behind the curtain for things that was always there that I never knew it functioned that way. So definitely gave me a lot of appreciation for John Schulberg, my predecessor, who was in this role for 33 years. I've definitely enjoyed it. There's a great team at Waterways Journal, and thankful to have you as part of that team.
Well, I thank you. Appreciate it. And good work, Frank.